I don't think I could ever fall in love with a black woman.
Whoa, that's a bold statement.
Oh, really? And why is that?
I just can't picture it.
You should keep an open mind.
Nah, I don't think so.
You don't?
He's serious.
He was standing across from Daniel Mensa, his oldest friend, in the kind of rooftop bar that exists specifically to make people feel their lives are going well. The city spread gold and electric below them, and the night was warm, and Daniel had just spent 20 minutes suggesting that Sejun's 10th consecutive failed relationship perhaps pointed to a pattern worth examining. Beside Sejun, holding a glass of sparkling water with the composed ease of a woman who had perfected the art of being fully present without demanding the room, was Abina Clark, Ghanaian British, 30 years old, a woman whose brain worked like a precision instrument and whose laugh arrived like a surprise every single time. She was also Sejun's best friend, had been for 10 years. So when he said what he said, Daniel set his drink down slowly and folded his hands on the table. "You've just ended things with your 10th girlfriend," Daniel said. "I'm suggesting you expand your perspective. And your response is that you could never date a black woman? I need you to explain that to me like I'm listening carefully, because I am." There was a pause. Abina turned her glass once in her hand. Sejun leaned back with the relaxed posture of a man who had thought this through and stopped feeling the need to defend it. "Different worlds," he said simply. "Different expectations, different upbringings, different cultural wiring. It's not something I say with any malice. It's just not something I've ever been able to picture for myself." Daniel stared at him. Then, with the slow inevitability of a man watching a fire he did not start, he turned to look at Abina. Abina was already looking at Sejun. Her expression lasted for exactly 1 second before she replaced it with something smooth and unreadable. 1 second, a flicker of something old and quietly worn, the kind of feeling that has been carefully managed for so long it has learned to disappear on command. Sejun didn't see it. He never saw those moments. He never had. Daniel saw it. He always did. So Abina said, her voice completely level, "What you're saying is that it doesn't matter who she is, doesn't matter what she's like, how she thinks, how she makes you feel. If she's a black woman, you've already decided." Sejun nodded once. "That's what I'm saying." Abina looked at her glass. Then she looked back up, and something in her eyes had crossed a line, moved from feeling into decision, from patience into intention. "All right," she said, "let's make it interesting." Daniel sat forward. Sejun raised an eyebrow. Abina placed her hand flat on the table. 3 dates, real ones. You take me on 3 actual dates, and I will make you fall in love with me. If I succeed, you have to admit, publicly and specifically to Daniel, that your wall had nothing to do with culture and everything to do with fear. If I don't succeed, she smiled, and it was the most quietly dangerous smile Sejun had ever seen arranged on a familiar face. I will handle your entire Jeju Island trip, full itinerary, accommodation, bookings, everything. My money, my time, my problem. Sejun looked at her. He looked at Daniel, who had already arranged his expression of a man watching something historic unfold. He looked back at Abina. He saw his best friend. He saw the person who had talked him through his father's illness and his company's worst quarter, and the kind of 3 a.m. phone calls that only happen between people who had decided each other are safe. He saw someone so familiar that the familiarity had become its own kind of blindness. He could not imagine looking at her and feeling anything his heart hadn't already sorted, labeled, and stored neatly under a category that was not this. "Deal," he said. Abina smiled. She picked up her glass and took a sip. Under the table, hidden by the white linen cloth and the noise of the bar and 10 years of practiced composure, her hand was trembling. Before we go any further, if you are the kind of person who believes that love doesn't care about the walls we build for it, that it will find its way through every well-reasoned excuse and every comfortable certainty we hide behind, then this story was made for you. Hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment telling us what you think is about to happen, and like this video because you are going to want to be in this community when it ends. Now, where were we? Kwon Se-jun was 33 and had built his family's modest tech distribution firm into a regional powerhouse before anyone expected him. Not for luck, not for inheritance, through the specific combination of strategic clarity and a work ethic that occasionally alarmed the people around him. The financial press had written flattering things about him. His competitors had written less flattering things. His ex-girlfriends had written nothing, but if they had, the recurring theme would have been a man who gave everything to his work and curated access to everything else. Abina Clark was 30 and worked in ethical compliance consulting, which meant she spent her days finding the places where corporations had decided the rules applied to everyone but themselves, and then making that decision very uncomfortable for them. She was extraordinarily good at it. She had a gift for reading the structure beneath the surface, for seeing what was actually being said underneath what was being said. It was, as it turned out, a skill with applications beyond the professional. They had met in the first week of university and had been in each other's lives without interruption since 10 years, which was precisely why Se-jun was certain he would win the bet. There was simply no version of this where Abina Clark, who had eaten his leftovers and corrected his presentation decks and fallen asleep on his couch watching films she had chosen and he had pretended to tolerate, became something his chest did not know how to categorize. He arrived at her building on a Friday evening in a car that was too nice for the occasion, which was a habit he had not yet broken, wearing a jacket he had chosen without thinking about it, which was not. He texted from downstairs. She replied 3 minutes later to say she was coming. When the building doors opened and she walked out, Se-jun's hand stopped moving on the steering wheel. He had seen Abina in every state that 10 years produces: post-flight, unbothered, makeup-free on a Tuesday, fully assembled for someone else's event, undone by bad news, lit from the inside by good news. He believed he had cataloged every version of her. He had not cataloged this one. Her hair, her crown of thick, gorgeous natural coils that she usually wore loosed or pinned depending on the day, had been set into long, sleek twists that fell past her shoulders, each one catching the evening light as she moved. The dress was deep green, simple in the way that things are simple when they have been chosen precisely. She wore gold at her ears and wrists and moved toward the car with a certainty she had always possessed, but tonight wore differently, as though she had decided to stop dimming it. She opened the door and got in. For 4 full seconds, Se-jun said nothing. "You look," he started. "Thank you," she said simply, settling her seatbelt. She turned to him with a calm that was deliberate and complete. "You look nice too. Are we going?" He drove. He kept his eyes on the road with the focus of a man making a choice about where they landed. At the restaurant, which was good and clean and exactly the kind of place he defaulted to when he wanted the evening to be reliable, they found their rhythm immediately, the easy, overlapping, decade-deep rhythm of two people who share a conversational shorthand. They interrupted each other and finished each other's thoughts, and laughed at things that required no explanation to be funny. Then Abina set her fork down. "Se-jun," she said, "don't look at me like you always look at me tonight." He met her eyes. "Look at me like you're on a date, like a woman you don't already know. You agreed to that." He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back and looked at her, not the habitual, peripheral, unconscious way, actually looked. She held his gaze without moving, and they kept talking, kept eating, kept laughing, and there were stretches of the evening where Se-jun forgot entirely that there was a bet attached to any of this. He was simply there, present in a way that surprised him, engaged in a way that required no effort. Abina said something about a client negotiation that made him press his hand over himself to contain himself. When he finally laughed, she looked at him with an expression he had never seen her use before. It was warm and direct, and it didn't look away. It was the expression of someone who had decided to stop standing behind glass. He felt something happen in his chest that he did not immediately have a word for. He looked away. When he looked back, she was reaching for her wine as if she had been doing nothing but reaching for her wine. He thought, with a clarity that arrived uninvited, has she always looked like this? By the time the bill came, they were both still laughing about something genuinely funny, and it took Sejun a full minute to remember that this had been designated a date. Outside, waiting for the car, he looked at her sideways. "See," he said, 10 years, Abina. The friendship is the thing. I can't manufacture something that isn't there." She looked at him for a moment, then she laughed, low and easy. "You're very confident for someone who still has 2 dates left." The car came. He held the door. She slid in and looked up at him before he closed it, and the expression on her face was unhurried and entirely unreadable, and something in his chest moved a small but measurable distance from where it had been. He closed the door. He got in. He drove. 17 minutes from her flat, the car made a sound that cars do not make when everything is fine. Then it slowed. Then it stopped. Sejun stared at the dashboard with the expression of a man being betrayed by something he trusted. He tried the ignition. He tried it again. His driver was unavailable. The service line quoted 90 minutes. He looked out the window at the sky, which had been clear and cooperative all evening, and was now delivering rain with a commitment of something that had been planning this. Abina looked at the rain. She looked at him. "So we're just sitting here for 90 minutes? "There's a hotel," he said, pointing at a lit sign down the road. "We can wait there." They ran for it. The hotel was small and warm and smelled of clean linen. The woman at the reception desk apologized with genuine distress. A conference had absorbed most of the rooms. One left. Lisa and Sejun looked at each other. 10 years of history looked back. They had shared a tent on a hiking trip in Jeju, a row of airport chairs during a 6-hour delay in Amsterdam, a single blanket during a power cut in Accra. A hotel room was nothing. "We'll take it," Sejun said. The room was warm and modest. 1 bed, 1 narrow couch. Sejun claimed the couch without deliberation, while Abina disappeared into the bathroom. He sat answering emails, half listening to the shower. Then the bathroom door opened, and Abina came out in a hotel robe, tied at the waist, her twists now loose and damp at the ends, water tracing slow lines down her neck. She was scrubbing the back of her hair with a small towel, looking at the floor, completely unconstructed. Sejun looked up. He found him looking. "What? Nothing," he said, and returned to his phone with excessive focus.
He went to shower. When he came out, she was in the small kitchenette, moving with the specific efficiency of someone who has converted every available resource into a plan. She had clearly interrogated the hotel's provisions, supplemented them from her bag, because Abina Clark traveled with a small pouch of spices the way other people traveled with medication, and apparently charmed something additional out of the kitchen staff because the room smelled of heat and pepper, and something so deeply, elementally warm that Sejun stood in the doorway and forgot what he had been about to say. "You didn't order room service. I wanted to cook something." She didn't look up. "Sit down." "You don't cook for me." "I cook all the time." "Not for me specifically. You always want Korean food when we're together, so I never—" He stopped. She said nothing. "Sit down, Sejun." She had made light soup, Ghanaian light soup with rice, assembled from the hotel's provisions and what she'd brought, and whatever she'd sourced with the warmth she deployed specifically for strangers she'd decided to like. She set a bowl in front of him and sat across with her own, watching him from under her lashes without appearing to watch him. He picked up his spoon. He tasted it. He was very still for a moment. Then he took another spoonful. Then another. He finished the bowl. He set down his spoon and looked at her. "What is in that?" he said. She was trying not to let the width of her smile show completely. "My grandmother's recipe," she said. "She made it every time I was ill or sad or needed something that felt like home. The tomatoes are the important part, and the—" She stopped. She screamed. Not a prepared sound, not something with any thought behind it, a raw physical response to the small dark shape making its unhurried way near the tile near her chair. She was behind Sejun in under 2 seconds, arms around him from behind, face pressed into his shoulder, grip unexpectedly strong. He looked at the floor. It was a small cockroach, traveling with complete indifference to the drama it had caused. "Abina," he said, "it's a cockroach." "I am aware of what it is," she said into his shoulder. "It's moving very slowly. It has absolutely no interest in you. Sejun, please." He dealt with it. When he came back, she was standing at the farthest reasonable point from where the incident had occurred, arms crossed, robe drawn tight, looking at the floor with the expression of someone who had survived an ordeal and wanted that acknowledged. She looked up. "Don't." "I'm not doing anything," he said. His face was perfectly arranged. "I can see you not doing anything," she said. He sat back down. She returned slowly, still monitoring the floor. And something happened in Sejun's chest without his authorization, something warm and fond and startled by itself. This woman, he thought, who goes into rooms full of hostile executives and disassembles their financial misconduct without raising her voice, is genuinely terrified of a cockroach. He thought the word adorable before he caught it. He caught it immediately afterward and regarded it with suspicion. The rain did not stop. It deepened, and lightning began to divide the sky into white, bright pieces, and the thunder that followed was the kind that resettles in your chest after it arrives. Abina was on the bed. Sejun was on the couch. The light was off. "Sejun," she said into the dark. "Yes?" "I can't sleep when it thunders." She said it plainly, without performance. "I always have been. It's not new. It's not a thing I'm announcing. It's just true." Sejun looked at the ceiling. Then he got up, crossed the room, and lay on top of the covers beside her. She turned immediately and rested her head against his chest and exhaled, the full, slow release of a person letting go of something they'd been holding. He looked at the ceiling. Lightning came. She flinched slightly. "Listen," he said. "Don't think about the thunder. I'll tell you something." "What?" "Doesn't matter. Just listen." And he told her something ridiculous, something about his first year running the company, a supplier meeting he'd walked into with his shirt inside out because he'd dressed in the dark after sleeping at the office, and how his most senior executive, a man of 50 with the dignity of someone twice that, had simply reached over mid-meeting and turned his collar right and continued talking without mentioning it. Small story, warm story. His voice dropped as he told it, finding a register that was quiet and even and steady against the rain. Abina's breathing slowed. He kept going, softer now, until her breathing told him she was elsewhere. He stopped talking. He looked down at her. In the moving dark of the storm, she was very still, her twists fallen loose around her face, her lashes against her cheeks, one hand half curled against his chest. He had been in rooms with women who understood how to be looked at, women who presented themselves with deliberate, practiced effect. Abina had never once in 10 years tried to make him look. She had simply been herself, completely and without apology, and had somehow not noticed, or perhaps decided not to care, that being completely and without apology herself was more disarming than anything studied could ever be. "Don't look at me like your best friend," she had said. "Look at me like a woman." He looked at her. He thought, with a quiet that felt like arriving somewhere after a long drive, maybe I have never looked properly. Morning came gray and gentle. The rain thinned to something almost apologetic. Sejun had been awake for some time, staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man in an honest conversation with himself that he is not entirely winning. Abina stirred, opened her eyes, found him already looking. 2 seconds. Then she sat up. "Good morning." "Morning." She reached for her phone. He swung his legs off the bed. They moved around the room with the practiced ease of two people who had decided, without discussing it, that last night was a circumstance, a consequence of weather and bad timing and hotels that had run out of rooms. Nothing to examine, nothing to name. They checked out. He drove her home. She got out, leaned into the open window and said, 2 more dates, exactly as he'd known she would. "More than yesterday," she added, simply, and walked inside. He sat in the parked car for longer than was necessary. Then he drove. 3 days passed.
He was, by every observable measure, functional. He attended his meetings, reviewed his reports, made his decisions. Abina crossed his mind regularly, but that was normal. That was friendship. On Wednesday, he texted her. He had to think about what to say for several minutes longer than a text to a best friend should have required. He typed, 2 more dates. When works? Her reply came 12 minutes later. I was starting to wonder. Sunday is fine.
On Sunday, he called to ask what she wanted to do. He offered options. A gallery opening he'd seen mentioned, a new rooftop restaurant that had a waiting list he could circumvent, a members club with a view. She texted back one word, beach. He stared at his phone. Then he typed, okay, and felt something loosen in his chest that he didn't examine. She was already outside when he arrived. A yellow wrap dress, flat sandals, her natural coils fully restored and magnificent, a canvas tote on one shoulder. She got in and she smelled like shea butter and something warm and floral, and she said good morning with the ease of someone who had not spent the better part of a week thinking about the previous Saturday. Or, if she had arranged her face so that it told a different story entirely. The beach was busy in the ordinary way of weekend beaches. Families, couples, children in complete negotiation with the water. Seojin stood at the edge of the car park, looking at all of it with the mild bewilderment of a man who had not been to a beach that was not attached to a resort in several years. He liked it immediately. There was something irreducible about it, something his money could not improve. Abina bought coconut from a vendor near the entrance because she knew he liked it and had not asked, and then the day became the least curated day Seojin had spent in recent memory. They walked the length of the beach, they found a spot, and Abina produced a travel-sized IO board from her tote, and they played in the shade of a palm tree, Seojin losing with more grace than he usually managed, because she was very good, and he found that watching her think was unexpectedly diverting. They waded in the shallow water with their shoes in their hands because she suggested it, and he found himself saying yes before he had finished processing the question. At some point during a stretch of walking in easy silence, Seojin looked at her sideways, at the way she was watching the water, at the way the late afternoon light handled her face, at the entirely uncurated version of her that existed only in moments like this, and he thought, when did this happen? Not when did she become this person? He knew she had always been this person. When did he start seeing it as something that rearranged him slightly every time he looked? By late afternoon, they were sitting on a low wall near the water, shoes back on, the light going golden and long. Abina was looking at the horizon. I always said I'd come to the beach with a boyfriend someday, she said. Seojin turned to look at her. The light was doing something to her profile. Too bad I ended up here with my best friend instead, she said, and looked at him sideways with a smile that was entirely without self-pity. He looked at her for a moment. I'm here, he said, if you ever want to come back. She tilted her head. What if you're with someone by then? Doesn't matter, he said, and meant it with a certainty that arrived before he had reasoned it out. She was quiet. Then she looked back at the water, and her voice was softer. That's not true, and you know it. You always pull back from me when you're with someone. It's always your girlfriend who... She paused. I know it makes sense. I understand why. She looked at him. Promise me something. What? Promise me that wherever we both end up, whoever we're with, we stay. We don't become people who lost each other. Seojin looked at her. Something in the sentence was wrong, and he couldn't say why. Not the words were generous and good, but his chest reacted to wherever we both end up with a feeling like a door being closed that he hadn't been ready to see close. I promise, he said. She nodded, looking satisfied. He drove her home. She waved from her door, and he watched her go inside and sat in the car after the door had shut for a moment that lasted longer than was entirely explained by traffic. He texted her on Thursday about the third date. He had been thinking about it since Monday.
He would not have stated this in those terms, but the anticipation had been residing in the background of everything for days. He kept his message brief. "Third date this weekend?" He sent it and set his phone face down on his desk in a way that was definitively not watching it. Friday passed with no reply. He told himself she was working. She always worked strange hours. Her cases took her without warning. Saturday passed. Sunday. Monday morning arrived, and Seojin was doing something he had never in his adult life done about an unanswered message. He was, if he was honest, struggling to be in rooms. Daniel called at noon, and Seojin picked up immediately, which was its own kind of signal. "Have you spoken to Abina? She's not replying. Maybe she's busy. Daniel, it's been 4 days. She always replies, even in the middle of her worst cases. She always—" He heard himself. He took a breath. "I'm going to her place." He was there in 20 minutes. He pressed the intercom. He was about to press it again when the main building door opened from inside and a man came out. Tall, well put together, the comfortable bearing of someone familiar with the space, someone who knew where to park. He held the door for Seojin with the naturalness of someone who had done it before and went to his car. Seojin stood in the doorway and watched the car pull into traffic. Then he heard her voice from the stairwell, slightly breathless, moving quickly. She came through the inner door and stopped when she saw him. "Seojin," her voice was careful. "You haven't answered me. I know. I'm sorry." She looked at him steadily. "Can we go outside?" They stood on the steps in the warm afternoon. Abina had her hands in her pockets. "Who was that?" Seojin asked. She looked at him without flinching. "His name is Kofi. He's my boyfriend." The word landed like something physical. "We've been talking for a while," she said. "It happened quickly. I should have told you sooner, and I'm sorry I didn't." He opened his mouth. "That's—" he started. He cleared his throat. "That's good. That's great." The words had the correct shape, but the interior was wrong, and they both heard it. "What about the third date?" Seojin asked. Abina looked at him, and the gentleness in her expression was somehow harder to receive than anything else could have been. "I think 2 was enough," she said softly. "You were right, Seojin. The bet wasn't going to work."
She smiled, and it was real and warm, and he couldn't read past it. "I should put my energy into this now. Give it a real chance." He nodded, and she continued, and he understood that she was doing to him what he had done to her every single time. "I think while things are new with us, I should probably pull back a little from us seeing each other as much, just while we're getting started." Seojun stared at her. He had done this to her. 10 years, every girlfriend, every new relationship, he had asked her without asking to make herself smaller, and she had done it every time without making him feel it. And now she was asking for the same consideration, and he could not make his chest arrange itself correctly around the request. "Of course," he said, "obviously." She looked at him one more moment. Then she went inside. Seojun stood on the steps. Then it started to rain. He did not move. The rain came down on him with the sincerity of something that had been waiting, and he stood in it like a man who had been stopped, paused, interrupted mid-sentence by something he did not have the vocabulary for yet. He had the vocabulary. He simply was not ready to use it. The following week was professionally the worst he had produced in years. He lost the thread in a board presentation he had personally authored. His deputy, a meticulous man named Park, who had worked alongside him through 3 company expansions and had never once seen him lose the room, slid him a note across the table that said simply, "Do you need a break?" He wrote back, "Fine," and stared at his own handwriting and thought that fine was possibly the most aggressively dishonest word in any language. He called Daniel that evening. "Abina has a boyfriend," he said. "She called off the third date. She's stepping back to spend time with him. She said she needs space." He heard his own voice, and it had a quality he did not recognize, something without its usual surface. Daniel said, with the careful pacing of someone choosing every word, "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Seojun said. "That's the problem. I genuinely do not know what this is." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then his voice lost its usual ease. Be honest with yourself. What are you feeling right now, Seojun? Because from where I'm standing, this sounds like a man who got so comfortable with someone always being exactly where he expected her to be that he never once thought about what it would feel like if she wasn't. Seojun did not sleep. He lay in the dark and thought about a restaurant table and the way she had held his gaze without blinking. He thought about a bowl of light soup in a small hotel room and how warm the room had been, and how specifically warm. He thought about her buried in his shoulder over a cockroach and how completely right it had felt to be the person she ran to. He thought about a beach at golden hour and the word wherever and how it had felt like a closing door. He thought about 10 years. 10 years of her being 3 feet away, 10 years of him looking directly at her and not seeing what he was looking at. The truth arrived at 2 in the morning with the quiet of something that has been walking toward you for a very long time and has finally run out of distance. He was in love with Abina Clark. He had possibly been in love with Abina Clark for longer than he was prepared to calculate, and he had spent a decade being so certain of what he could and couldn't feel that he had not noticed what he was actually feeling at all. A message from Daniel arrived on Thursday morning. Seojun was in a meeting, genuinely present for the first time in a week, when his phone buzzed. He looked at it under the table. It was a formal digital invitation, designed, the kind you send for something significant. His eyes moved through the words and found engagement celebration, and 2 names, Abila Clark and Kofi Ansa. Today. The meeting continued. Someone was presenting a market analysis. Seojun stood up. The room went quiet. "Clear the afternoon," he said. "Reschedule everything." And he walked out. The venue was a rooftop garden, string lights and the city below and the smell of something warm being served from somewhere, and Seojun arrived with his jacket not quite right and his hair not quite considered, because he had driven here from a board meeting and not once thought about how he looked. Daniel appeared at his shoulder the moment he stepped off the lift, holding a drink, wearing an expression that was warm and said nothing useful. "You came. Where is she?" He saw her. Abina was across the roof with a group of people, mid-laugh, wearing a white dress that was simple and completely luminous, and Seojun had the thought that she was the best thing in the room, with the specific clarity of a man who has finally stopped arguing with his own eyes. A man stood beside her, tall and at ease, who said something that made her lean toward him slightly, and Seojun was already moving. He crossed the roof. People noticed the way people notice when someone moves with that quality of direction. He reached Abina. He was directly in front of her, and the group around them quieted. She looked up and found his face, and her expression went still and watchful, and he could not read it, and he didn't stop. "Abina," he said, "I can't do this. I cannot stand here and watch you celebrate an engagement to someone else when I have driven here from the middle of a board meeting because the alternative was staying in that room, and I couldn't." He took a breath. "I know I was slow. I know I said things that were wrong and built walls for reasons that were not good reasons and took for granted something I had no right to take for granted." His voice was steady, the way things are steady when everything underneath them is not. "But I am asking you, please, don't do this. Not yet. I will be better. I will be better than I have been for every one of the 10 years you were right there and I was looking past you. You deserve someone who sees you, actually sees you, and I know I haven't, and I am sorry it took me this long to get here, but I am here, and I see you, and I would spend whatever time you give me making sure you know that." The rooftop was very quiet. Then Daniel laughed, the full, helpless, delighted laugh of a man who has been waiting for something for a very long time and is now watching it arrive. Seojun looked at Daniel. He looked at Abina. Her eyes had filled with something that had been held back for a long time and was only now being allowed to exist in the open. One tear escaped. She let it, and then she smiled. Not the effortless, unreadable smile she had used at the dinner table. The real one, the one that had all of her in it, the relief and the joy and the particular brightness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for 10 years and has just been offered somewhere to put it down. "You lost the bet," she said softly. Sejun blinked. He looked at Daniel, who was composing himself in stages, pressing his hand to his mouth. He looked at the man beside Abina, Kofi, who had taken a small, deliberate step back and was wearing the unmistakable expression of a man who has successfully completed a performance. Sejun looked back at Abina. "There is no engagement," she said. "Kofi is a friend of Daniel's. He helped." Her voice was quiet and even. "And Daniel has known how I felt about you since year 2. Sejun turned to Daniel. Daniel raised both hands. "You both needed a push," he said. "I simply created the conditions." Sejun looked at Abina. The tears were real. The smile was real. 10 years were suddenly completely and entirely visible to him. Every moment he had looked past her, every moment she had watched him look past her and said nothing, every moment she had shown up without being asked and stayed without being kept. He had been the least observant person in his own story. He laughed. It started low and built into something real and slightly undone, the laugh of a man who has been entirely outwitted by the people who love him most, and he covered his face briefly and then dropped his hand. "You set me up," he said. "I needed to know," she said, "whether it was actually there or whether I'd been hoping for something that was never going to be." He stepped toward her. "It's there," he said. His voice was only for her now. "It has been there. I was just too certain of my own limitations to see what was directly in front of me the entire time. I don't care that you tricked me. I would have tricked me too." He looked at her. "I'm standing on a rooftop in the middle of what I now understand was a very well-organized operation, and the only thing I feel is grateful, because you cared enough to try, because I got here." She laughed through the tears, the real laugh, the one he knew better than any other sound. He opened his arms. She stepped into them, and when he held her, it felt like the most overdue thing he had ever done, like a word he had been mispronouncing for 10 years and had only now heard said correctly. He asked her properly 3 days later, not in the aftermath of the rooftop, because he wanted it to be something that belonged entirely to the two of them, and not to any dramatic surrounding context. He found a small Ghanaian-Korean fusion restaurant that had opened recently, the kind of place that existed at the intersection of both of them, which seemed correct. They ate, they talked, they laughed at things that had always been funny. It was completely, unchangingly easy. The dessert arrived. On the plate, in his careful handwriting, were 5 words in dark chocolate. "Can I be your boyfriend?" Abina looked at the plate for a long moment. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with the expression of a man who was asking genuinely, who had no certainty about the outcome, who had finally understood that certainty about outcomes was something you forfeited gladly when the question mattered enough. She looked back at the plate. She looked back at him. "Yes," she said, and her whole face said the rest. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning that smelled of shea butter and coffee and the specific warmth of 2 people who had finally stopped being careful with each other, Abina Clark and Kwan Sejun got married. Not with fanfare, with Daniel crying before the ceremony started, and a small gathering of people who had watched these two circle each other for a decade with the patient faith of people who believe in eventual things. Sejun held her hand throughout and thought about a hotel room in the rain, a bowl of light soup, a cockroach and a storm, a beach in golden hour, and all the small, unremarkable moments that had been quietly building something he'd been too convinced of his own certainty to recognize. Abina held his hand and thought about 10 years of loving someone from 3 feet away, 10 years of waiting for him to look. He was looking now. He intended to spend the rest of his life looking. And that is what happens when you stop letting your walls make your decisions. Abina didn't give up. She didn't win him over with perfection. She let him see her, completely and without apology. And that was enough. That has always been enough. If this story moved you, do us a favor. Subscribe right now. There is so much more coming and you do not want to miss it. Leave a comment below and tell us which moment got you. Was it the light soup, the fake engagement, or the moment he stood up in the middle of a board meeting and walked out without explanation? Like this video so more people find it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the right person sometimes just needs to finally look up. Tell us where you're watching from. We'll see you in the next one.